Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to be looking at the Necromancy combat changes, which is going to come on Monday. So it has been a few days since this has been announced, but I want to take a look at the changes and sort of talk about my opinions on it and whether it will be a nerf or a buff. So some of the changes that we can expect in Monday's update, we are actually going to get a new ability. And so it's going to be the Conjure Undead ability. You can see, similar to this clip here, you can basically put all three of your Conjure abilities into this Conjure Undead Army ability and summon them all at once. So it's sort of a nice quality of life update. So I really do like that. It says 99 Necromancy and Tier 7 at the Well of Souls is required to have this ability. Another one of the bigger changes, which we will be looking at and talking about a lot, is that the adrenaline cost has been removed from the Conjure and the Command abilities. So that is huge. I think it is, well, it's obviously a huge buff to Necromancy, but there has been changes to counteract that a bit. So let's take a look at it. So again, the new Undead Army ability available, Tier 7, so same thing as the Soul Split Necromancy Incantation. So now let's take a look at the Necromancy balancing updates. So first, there's going to be change with the Conjure Skeleton Warrior ability. The damage range from the skeleton has been reduced by about 5%. So now it's going to be 22 to 28%, where it was 27 to 33. So the average damage that the skeleton is going to be doing is going to be less. So obviously a nerf there. However, the Command Skeleton Warrior has been increased, so that is going to be a buff. So previously, each rage stack, which is whenever the skeleton actually hits the target, it gains a rage stack. So it would offer 1% ability damage for each rage stack whenever you command the Skeleton Warrior. The average damage would be about 55% per hit, which is 30% base, and the 25% from stacks. Now they have changed it so each rage stack increases the damage by 3%. So it's saying that you are going to get the 25% base damage, because that's the average damage it's going to deal, plus a 75% damage increase from the stacks. So when you do use the Command Skeleton Warrior ability, you should notice that it deals quite a bit more damage. In fact, it's close to almost double the amount of damage that it has been doing before. So I think this is a nice balancing update. I mean, you are going to lose some damage just off of your Skeleton Warrior when it's not enraged, but when you use that ability, it's going to be far more rewarding, and that's going to be something you're going to want to prioritize a lot more now, is command your Skeleton Warrior for the pretty powerful damage. Another change with the Putrid Zombie. So again, adrenaline cost was removed for that and the Command Putrid Zombie ability. So that is great. They have reduced the duration of the Putrid Zombie by 3 seconds. Movement speed was increased from walking to running, so that's always good. The passive poison was reduced by quite a bit. So it's 27 to 33%, now it's only 8 to 12. So that is a pretty big nerf to just the damage that the Putrid Zombie does. And so they say that the poison damage was just offering too much passive damage for very little investment. So they did change that around. I think it is balanced pretty well just because the adrenaline cost is removed. And so before in fights like Raziel, you'd only summon the zombie at the start. Once it's gone, it's not worth the 50% adrenaline cost. Now, I guess you can use it for more longer fights. You can summon it more without that 50% adrenaline cost. If you do use the Command Putrid Zombie, that is pretty powerful hit. You're going to deal 8 to 10k, I think. So that's having both of those abilities costing no adrenaline, I think is going to be, well, it's obviously going to be a buff. Overall, I would say the Putrid Zombie maybe a little bit of a buff just because it wasn't actually used that much in certain fights. You also have the Vengeful Ghost. So adrenaline cost was removed. It was 30%, now it's 0. So that's great. One thing about the Vengeful Ghost is that the healing part, it was quite overpowered. And so now the healing is going to be reduced to 125%. It was 175. However, before this update, healing was happening on attack rather than on hit. So what that means is, well, they have changed that. So now you get healed based on the damage dealt. And so things like your vulnerability, a stack, or your haunted stack. I'm not even sure, maybe the robe of the first necromancer stack, just for your contra damage, that will now be applied. They'll use that damage when you're getting healed. So you might actually get healed more than before. It's just a different way of calculating it. I would say overall, I mean, it's definitely more in line with what they want, I think. I think they wanted to lower just the passive damage that you'd get from Necromancy, and you'd have to be a bit more strategic with things. But overall, I don't really think that's a nerf at all. It's pretty close to a nerf or buff. I'd say it sort of equals out, but the adrenaline cost is obviously huge. The command Vengeful Ghost ability, that was extremely powerful. So they did remove the adrenaline cost. It costed 70% adrenaline. So that is a huge change. They also did make it now have a fixed duration of 30 seconds. So before, the duration of it was a bit weird. It kind of seemed like it lasted as long as your ghost did, sometimes even a bit longer. Now it's just going to be a base 30 seconds. So before, the command Vengeful Ghost ability applied a haunted stack. And what it would do is it would have the target take double damage from all targets, except that it would be capped at 35% ability damage. So this has been changed drastically. The target's now going to take 10% of base damage up to a cap of 20% ability damage. So a huge reduction in that. It still is going to help, but I think that's obviously a nerf. It's going to hurt a lot for the short boss fights. So things like Raziel, where you would use the command Vengeful Ghost ability right at the start of the fight, and it would last most of the fight, where you're getting, you know, almost double damage on the boss. So now it's going to be reduced quite a bit. However, on the longer boss fights, this is obviously going to help, because usually you wouldn't actually use that command Vengeful Ghost ability again because of the 70% adrenaline cost. But now there isn't any adrenaline cost. So you're probably just going to use it, whenever, because it's obviously some extra damage that you can get. So overall, I'd say probably a nerf there, but the adrenaline cost removal is pretty huge. They did have some changes to the life transfer incantation, just increase the duration from that. They also have the life points you lose based on your base life points, which is a nice change, a buff to that ability. Invoke Death incantation, increase the duration to apply the stack. So not really much of a change there. But overall, I would say that, they really just tweaked the changes with the conjures, and I would say that it is a nerf to some bosses, but a buff to some. So bosses like Raziel, where it's a fairly quick boss fight, and the adrenaline cost for the conjures and the command abilities, it didn't really have much of an impact because you just use them before the fight. So I would say it is a nerf to those bosses where the boss fight is a lot shorter. But if you do look at some bosses with longer fight times, like maybe you're doing a high enraged Arc Glacier, it could be a buff. I mean, there are some things that really seem like a buff. The zombie is a buff. The skeleton, it's a bit debatable. But those longer boss fights, I would say that this could be considered a buff. I think they did a really good job in balancing it. I haven't actually been able to test it or anything, but it seems like it is all pretty well balanced. So I am excited to test this out on Monday and see how the changes are received, and see Necromancy fares now, because it's obviously the strongest combat style right now. And it will just be interesting to see how these changes affect the skill. So those are the changes with the Necromancy combat style. Another thing I wanted to just briefly mention in this video is the combat beta. I did make a video on this earlier, and I will link it in the description. But they have said that the combat beta is going to be out on October 30th. So usually what they do is they just release a separate RuneScape server. It just copies your save file over, and you can just test out this beta there. It's going to be really exciting testing this out. So they really made 3 core changes to the 3 original combat styles. They changed the hit chance to damage potential. So before, if your hit chance was, let's say, 50%, you'd have a 50% chance at hitting your target. Now you're always going to hit the target. It's just that you're going to deal 50% of your maximum amount of damage. It creates more normalized combat damage where you're not really relying on RNG as much. So I really do like that change, and obviously they have that with Necromancy. The biggest change that they're going to make is they're going to increase the damage cap for all combat styles. So they're going to increase it from 10 to 12%, or 10 to 12,000 to 30,000, just like Necromancy. And as I mentioned in my video that I released previously on how these changes might affect the combat styles, that's going to have a huge effect on melee. Melee has the Berserk ability. You can deal double damage when using that ability. And Melee's main problem was hitting that 10 to 12k damage cap. So this is going to be a huge buff. Super excited to try out Melee and see how it does with the damage cap increase. It could be one of the better combat styles in RuneScape with that change. So it's going to be exciting to see. They are changing the critical strike system similar to how Necromancy does it. The critical strike system is quite complex the way it is right now. I did talk about it in my previous video if you guys want to check that out. But overall, this is a buff to combat. You will be dealing more damage on average with the new critical strike systems. That will be really nice to see. They did also release the drop rates for the bosses, so that is good information to have. The pet for Hermod is actually 1 in 2,000, which is kind of crazy. Another thing that they released is Raziel's drop rates. So it looks like the chance to get a weapon is 1 in 320, and then the armor is 1 in 128. The pet is 1 in 1,500. So it just gives you some perspective on the drop rates for those bosses. I've been about 100 kills dry at Raziel, so it's nice to know that maybe I'm not actually dry. I have to get the 128 kills. But just interesting to see. So that's really all they touched on in the news post. Overall, as I mentioned, I would say the changes to Necromancy, they are going to be a nerf to the shorter term fights, but maybe a buff to the longer term fights just because of the reduced adrenaline cost. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of the changes to Necromancy, and talk about maybe the combat beta if you're excited for that. I know I'm super excited, and I've actually bought some melee gear to test out for the beta. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.